بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate, all the praise and all the gratitude due to our Lord, our merciful Lord. May His peace and blessings be upon all the messengers and upon their leader, the seal of the messengers, Muhammad, and his pure and immaculate family, progeny, and his righteous companions. May the peace of the Lord be with you and upon you all, my dear brothers and sisters. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is the third part in our series, our investigative series about certain narrations that had been attributed to the Prophet. So we are examining them. We pause to examine them, to see the roots, the origin of these ahadith, the chain of narrators, the content of the hadith, and whether it makes sense or not, whether there are contradictions in them or not. We cannot accept any hadith, obviously. This is our moral, religious, ethical, and rational responsibility. وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٌ إِنَّ السَّمْعَ وَالْبَصَرَ وَالْفُؤَادَ كُلُّ أُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ عَنْهُ مَسْئُولًا. You're going to be questioned about what you hear and what you say, and what you think about. About what you hear, you have to hear good, and the authentic one, you have a responsibility. You can't say, they cheated on me, they lied to me. You have to investigate. God says if you investigate, if you go after it with open-mindedness, not with bias, I'm going to guide you to the right answer. إِنَّ السَّمْعَ وَالْبَصَرَ, what you see, وَالْفُؤَادَ, what you think about. كُلُّ أُولَٰئِكَ, all these are held responsible. كُلُّ أُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ عَنْهُ مَسْئُولًا. So we come to this hadith, and this is the third part and the final part about this hadith, to see whether this hadith is an authentic or not. And of course we find that there are many problems in the chain of narrators. Some of those narrators of the hadith are unacceptable and rejected by Sunni standards and by Sunni scholars and by Sunni books. I'm not bringing any Shia reference here. Some of the major Sunni references, Sunni books, Sunni works, and Sunni scholars, they reject this hadith that says, اقتدوا بالذين من بعد أبي بكر وعمر, follow those who are after me, and semicolon, Abu Bakr and Umar. When we investigate this hadith, we see the Prophet to be the last one to know about this hadith. He never uttered this hadith. And we mentioned in the second part, if you go back to the second part, we mentioned that there are credible scholars, first class, world class scholars in the Sunni tradition who said this hadith is unacceptable, we can't depend on it. Part of them are a'immatul hadith, like at-Tirmidhi and others. Now when we come to the to the rationality of this hadith, does it make sense? The Prophet says, follow these two after me. Let's examine let's examine their conduct. The Prophet says, or he has been, quoted as being saying, that follow Abu Bakr and Umar after me. But Abu Bakr and Umar, they did not follow each other. When they examine their life, we find that certain things with Abu Bakr was halal, were halal these things, but when it came the time of Umar, it became haram. So they were not consistent with each other, even in their fatwas. In their opinion, religious opinion, they were not consistent. There were no consistency. An example of that. For instance, during the time of the first caliph, a person when he dies, whether he has children, his children are Arabs or non-Arabs, they would inherit. But when the second caliph comes, he says only those who have the right for inheritance are the Arabs. The A'ajim, they don't have that right of inheritance. The second, discrepancy between the two is that during the time of the first caliph, Abu Bakr, the temporary marriage was endorsed and accepted, and it was halal. Now comes the time of the second caliph, he forbids it and he makes it haram. So here we have these differences. There is no consistency. And the Prophet would not point to two persons and say, follow them after me, if there is no consistency between them. He would not do that. Because you will get confused. Which one I should follow? If both of them are equal and good and virtuous and truthful and honest, and they following the Kitab and the Sunnah, why then one of them says this is halal, the other says this is haram? So the Prophet would not do that. The second evidence, my friends, when you also investigate the life of and the seerah, the tradition of the first caliph and the second caliph, you will come across incidents where they lacked some information about the Quran. Not information about chemistry or physics or geology or astronomy. This is not their specialist. We don't expect them to understand about physics or astronomy. But about the Holy Quran, the caliph means, the meaning of caliph, he succeeds the Prophet, peace be upon him, in teaching the Quran to the Muslims. So if someone succeeds the Prophet, it means he has to be perfect like the Prophet. The Prophet never said to any follower, I don't know. The Prophet never hesitated when he was asked. Whenever he was asked, he can give the answer, the perfect answer, the best answer, the most authentic answer. But when we come to the history of the first caliph and the second caliph, we find, and this is from Sunni sources, that they both were asked on numerous occasions and they did not have the answer. Virtually they said, sorry, I don't know. I don't know this answer. They were asked sometimes in the mosque, in public. A lady stands to the second caliph and she discusses the issue of inheritance with her. She says, but this is what the Prophet says, this is what the Quran says. And when the second caliph did not know how to answer, and she proved that he's wrong in his answer, this is what he said, حَتَّى النِّسَاء أَفْقَهُ مِنْكَ يَا عُمَرْ. Even women, ordinary women, he means. And at that time, women, at that time, you have to understand the atmosphere of that time. Women were illiterate. They were not supposed to learn, and they were only busy homemakers. So Umar is saying that even women who are busy and homemakers and they are not learned, حتى النساء, even those women are better than you. And better in what? In knowledge. أفقه منك. They are more knowledgeable. When it comes to fiqh, fiqh is أحكام الدين, the science of religion. The science of religion, the science of Islamic law. They are better than you. So how can the Prophet says, follow those two guys after me, those two leaders after me, while they are not the best? Can the Prophet say something like that? Would you accept it? Ask your reason, your aql. Then, after that, if the Prophet says, follow those after me, and if the Prophet really said this, this means that Abu Bakr is infallible, and Umar is infallible, and they have no mistakes, but the history proves otherwise. And the history tells us that Abu Bakr himself, he never used this argument in the day of Saqifah. He never said to the companions of the Prophet, hey, I am better than everybody else because the Prophet said, follow me and follow Umar. He never brought this argument on that day. Otherwise, he would use this statement. He would say to the companions of the Prophet, listen to me. Listen to your Prophet. Obey him. The Prophet recommended me and Umar. The Prophet said those two men are perfect. Iqtadu. Follow them. But he himself, he never used this. Not only he never used it, he said something exactly the opposite. He said, أقيلوني فلست بخيركم. Leave me alone. Remove me. Leave me alone. I am not the best one among you. He himself, he said this. And I really, I respect him. I respect Abu Bakr for saying this sentence. Because he knew himself. He knew himself he's not the best. فلست بخيركم. He himself is saying. And he's not being diplomatic here or, being humble. No, he's speaking the truth. I'm not the best among you. And actually during the saga of the Saqifah, the drama of that day, of the Saqifah. Saqifah is the place where they gathered to take away the Khilafah and leadership from Imam Ali alayhi salam. The Prophet in numerous occasions before his death, he appointed Imam Ali. He did not want the Islamic Ummah to go through disarray and confusion and collapse. He appointed Imam Ali openly, publicly. He declared his name many times since he was in Mecca, since the beginning of his mission till the last day. But some people, they have ears and they have conscience and they want to learn and they want to follow, so they did follow. And others, they don't. For many reasons. I don't want to discuss the reasons. For many, many reasons. One of them is hubbud dunya, enchantment, fascination with this dunya. They didn't hear. They did not want to hear. So in Saqifah they gathered to choose someone to represent Islam, to be the leader, successor of the Prophet. On that particular day, the first Caliph, Abu Bakr ibn Abi Quhafa, he pointed to the other two orchestrators of this scenario. Saqifah was created by three people. The entire Saqifah, the entire conference, emergency conference, was run and orchestrated and designed by three masterminds, three leaders. Abu Bakr himself, Umar ibn al-Khattab, and Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, a third companion. They created this whole scenario. He pointed to them and he said, بايعوا أي الرجلين شئتم. بايعوا أي الرجلين شئتم. This is mentioned in الطبقات الكبرى. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal in his Musnad, he puts this story. As-Sirah al-Halabiyya and many others. They say Abu Bakr pointed to Umar and Ubaidullah ibn Jarrah and he said, choose them, don't choose me. So if the Prophet had said about him, he's the best, he should be the candidate. He should not hesitate. He should have full confidence and say, the Prophet said, follow me, so listen to the Prophet and follow me. But he himself never said this about himself. He himself never attributed such, great qualities to himself, or such a great hadith that refines him to his own self. He didn't do that. And then, actually, at the time of his death, we read in Tarikh al-Tabari, in another book, another nice book of history, Al-Aqd al-Farid, Al-Aqd al-Farid, okay, and Muruj al-Dhahab, Mas'udi, and also Al-Imamatu wa-Siyasa, that Abu Bakr said at the time of his death, وَدَدْتُ أَنِّي سألت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم لمن هذا الأمر. I wish I had asked the Prophet before his death, oh, the Messenger of God, who do you want to be the successor after you? فلا ينازعه أحد. Then nobody is going to dispute what the Prophet is saying. Although the Prophet he mentioned, of course, the Prophet he did mention, and he did appoint a successor, and you all know the name of that successor. And despite mentioning the successor, the niza', the dispute, the conflict took place. It did take place. So Abu Bakr is saying, I wish I had asked the Prophet, so we would have no dispute after his death. وَدَدْتُ أَنِّي كُنْتُ سَأَلْتُ هَلْ لِلْأَنصَارِ فِي هَذَا الْأَمْرِ نَصِيبٌ. I wish I had asked the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, are the Ansar, they have a portion, they have a share? Can one of them become the Caliph after you? And then Umar says, this is in Sahih al-Bukhari, my friends. This is in Sahih al-Bukhari, the second book after the Holy Quran. Sahih al-Bukhari. And then As-Sawa'iq al-Muhriqa. I mentioned in the previous session, As-Sawa'iq al-Muhriqa is written by Ibn Hajar al-Makki, one of the polemic writers against Shia Islam. In that book, this man Ibn Hajar al-Makki admits, and before him Al-Imam al-Bukhari, the top-notch leader of hadith in the Sunni tradition, the Imam, the unique person. He's truly unique in the history of Sunni Islam. He's revered, he's well respected. All the Sunnis, from the beginning to the end, to the last day of judgment, the last day before the day of judgment, they would respect and honor Imam al-Bukhari. He says in his book, he's quoting Umar, the second Caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab. He says, كانت بيعة أبي بكر فلتة. فلتة meaning something that takes place unprecedented, we are unaware of, something that strikes, suddenly, and it happens once and forever. It's like a mistake that we should not do it again. فلتة. وَقَى اللَّهُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ شَرَّهَا. That God protected the Muslims. It was a catastrophe, but God saved the Muslim Ummah. We shouldn't have done that. Umar is saying, we shouldn't have done that. God protected the Muslim Ummah against a big catastrophe. We appointed someone who's incompetent. This is the second Caliph in Sahih al-Bukhari, my friends. And then he says, وَمَنْ عَادَ لِمِثْلِهَا فَاقْتُلُوهُ. If any person does this, he brings this scenario, and imagine he was one of them. He was one of them. I like these things, Makes us dizzy, confuses us. Umar was one of the orchestrators of Saqifa, and he says Saqifa was so terrible and so bad. If someone wants to do the same, then kill him immediately. So here we come to this hadith, اقتدوا بالذين من بعدي أبي بكر وعمر, and we find that the chain of narrators has a problems. Many Sunni scholars and imams of hadith reject this particular saying, this piece, and we come to it and we see the history, the record contradicts this hadith. So we cannot accept it by any standards, neither rationally, nor spiritually, nor ethically. This hadith is unacceptable. We will go to another hadith. We put them under the microscope, we examine them, and we will come up with the answer to you, inshallah. Thank you for following me. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.